Hi everybody, welcome back to Finding Fashion. Today we're joined by Bex Martin, who is a brand editor and a consultant. Welcome Bex, thanks so much for joining us.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm sure
No,
everyone
thank
says
you.
that.
Could you just introduce yourself, please?
Yes, I'm Rebecca Martin. Most people call me Bex. I'm an editor and brand consultant. I used to be a journalist in women's magazines and then moved over to more kind of the brand side the last few years, and working with startups as well as bigger companies on everything from copy to digital, SEO, all that jazz.
She's done it all, guys. and and you studied and you studied journalism at Solent. How do you think that your degree shaped what you do now?
Oh, it did huge, and it was a long time ago I went to Solent as well. I started 17 years ago, so in 2003. So I'm sure it's a very different course then. I'm very old. No, it did hugely, and I know there's people that kind of look back and say, like, you know, would you have still gone to uni in hindsight? And I would have done. It was the best thing I ever did. I think for me, in terms of how I use it today, it kind of definitely got me to understand different methods of writing. You know, I learned very basic news writing to feature writing. We produced magazines and newspapers. It gave us connections. It gave me the confidence. But you know, the industry does change so much, and it has changed a lot in all those years. And I would still put, you know, real world experience as being absolutely imperative. I very much have to move with the times. Even now, you know, you think, you know, Google changes its algorithms every 6 months. Like, things change so much. Like, I never learned. We did like very basic websites, but it, you know, it's changed so much. So yeah, I think definitely making sure you're getting the real world experience.
Did you intern whilst you were studying?
What did I do? I did some interning at Wedding Magazine, at IPC Media, and I'd done a lot of like local newspapers, like reporting as well. I kind of also just did anything I could get my hands on. Like, anyone I met that was remotely related to media, I'd kind of asked to get in with them or asked to get my writing published. So I was really tenacious and really determined to kind of get my name out there, and I think you kind of had to be. But I was really lucky when I first graduated that I got a really good job. That kind of set me up really.
So that was a graduate scheme, wasn't it? That you a training scheme that you went.
It wasn't actually the graduate scheme. It was I was just employed as a graduate. So IPC did approach a few universities that run journalism and media courses to kind of fill this role, and it was to kind of edit the internal kind of staff magazine at the publishing company. So that was like the dream job for a student who, you know, wants to work at one of those companies. And I remember turning up on the first day. It was at King's Reach Tower at the time, and a huge tower block, and they had like 10-foot magazine covers in the windows, and it was just crazy. I felt like, you know, I would quote a film, but I'm probably too old that no one would know. I was just so excited and felt so lucky to be there, you know, rubbing shoulders in the lifts with NME and Marie Claire and InStyle and Horse and Hound and like every magazine you could think of. And it was the best job for kind of getting those connections. I knew I wanted to end up on one of those magazines. And I actually asked when Look magazine launched. I knew they would be launching a website, and I knew that digital was the place to be. And I actually approached my boss and, you know, the right people at the time and said, can I squeeze my current job into 4 days instead of 5 and spend a day down there a week writing? And they said yes. So I started going down 1 day a week and working on the Look website when it first launched, and that it kind of went from there really.
Do you think that there was any skills that you learned there in your first job that you still utilize now?
Yes, 100%. I think interviewing, that role was almost kind of like, my practice for the real thing. And I learned so much from the editors that I was working with as well. So, I'd go to the NME Awards, and my job was to kind of see how the brand ran it, how they ran the awards, and how the editor of NME was doing things, and then maybe write a quote for him to go on the staff intranet. So I learned a lot about interviewing because I was interviewing the people that did the interviews. So definitely those techniques. And I learned a lot about the business side because it was kind of a corporate magazine. I had to, at the time, I found it incredibly boring, but I was writing about, the business and the company and how that ran and all the cogs that made it work. So it definitely gave me a lot of corporate and business experience, which was actually really invaluable, because I think we all have to kind of understand now how brands function, whether that's a website or a magazine or a fashion brand. It's so important that you understand how they work as a company, whatever department you work in. That's gold.
And that totally feeds into what you do now, really.
It does, yeah. And I for a long time I thought, I'm a journalist, and I don't think now that we go into a career for like 40 years. I think times have changed. I think lots of people have many careers. And I wrote a blog once about how I think we shouldn't be defined by a job title. We should be defined by our skills. And we all have so many different skills. I think, I was talking to someone the other day that was leaving their job, and they're so stuck on finding another job with that job title. And I said, think about all the different things you do in your job and how you could use those. And that's how I kind of looked at things. I had all these digital skills. I had, I knew how Google and SEO worked. I knew how websites worked. I understood the data. I knew how to report. I understood content. I understood planning. And I kind of took that into working with startups and brands. And yeah, that's been invaluable. I think, our best advice would be, don't pigeonhole yourself. Learn from people that you work with around you, and, really take those skills. They're transformative across other industries as well.
Okay. And your next step was as a news writer. And I think that was still in IPC at the time, wasn't it? So what were the key strategies that you used to track news stories? Because, the news industry then was, fairly different to what it is now, but the principles are the same. So how did you go about kind of gaining those kind of sources and coming up with ideas and spinning them for a publication?
So it's very different between print and digital. On print, you'll have very good relationships with PRs. It will be very planned. You kind of book a shoot. Someone would be, a celebrity or an influencer. They'd be planning or promoting something. You'd then get interview time with them. That's very different way of working to digital. Digital is very fast paced. It's very reactive. You kind of lean on what other publications are doing. You build on those. You do have relationships with PRs, so you do try and get interview time. It might be that, something topical is going on and you're interviewing someone. Say there's like a royal wedding, and you're speaking to someone. Could be someone from Made in Chelsea. You might speak to their PRs and say, we're going to do an interview, but we're going to ask some questions about the royal wedding, or what would they wear, or so it's making that interview topical and relevant to now, as well as asking about them. And you're kind of following the main news agenda. So, what are people talking about and what are people searching for? Like for us, it was a mixture of working with PRs, working with PRs that are organising parties. So like attending parties, you go up and speak to those celebrities, do an interview with them, get that content that you need, but also kind of following stories and tracking them. So if something's happening and a story's developing, you kind of follow the other news channels and what they're doing and try and put your own, you know, your own take on it. At the time when I was doing it, it was very much, I say royal wedding, because it was all about Kate Middleton at the time, and spent my entire life writing about Kate, day in, day out. And that was our strategy. It was like, you know, has she worn something new, and let's speak to the fashion house, and how did they design it? Or, you know, she'd go somewhere, I'll be doing something, and can we get a quote from someone about what she was like? Or, you know, it's always trying to find that new content, and to make you stand out from the other publications as well. And also just knowing your facts, knowing inside out, knowing what's coming up. You know, you should absolutely know like your calendar. So, you know, it's award season at the beginning of the year, and then we go into festival season, and then we go into fashion week, and then we go into Christmas, and then back to award season again, and kind of knowing what's going on and what's topical as well. There's very much, it's more structured than people realize, I think, and more orchestrated than people realize. And particularly in digital, it's a lot to do with SEO. So, you know, if there's a rising search term on Taylor Swift, we need to write a story about Taylor Swift. So yeah, it's very data driven as well in digital news.
Did you use any particular technologies to kind of track those trending topics?
So at the time it was, yeah, we'd be looking at things like SEO Moz, our Google Analytics, I was looking at Google Trends. You know, at the time, I say this because things changed rapidly in the last few years, but, you know, we'd very much, if we were writing a story about David Beckham and Victoria Beckham, we'd look at who should we start the headline with? Are we going to get more traffic from starting it with David Beckham or starting it with Victoria Beckham? Like that's how orchestrated it was, and that's how technical writing a digital story was. You know, it was very specific in the headline. You know, how do we structure that headline? And, you know, we still work like that today. Brands even, you know, you have to have your H1 tag, which is your kind of main header on each page with your main keyword in it. Things do change and evolve, but yeah, there's lots of technicalities around it, as well as like the news side. But I find that really exciting as well.
So interesting. It evolves all the time, doesn't it?
Oh, so much, yeah.
So obviously you have got a lot of experience in digital. How has the social media revolution changed your job role as you've gone along, whether you've been working in editorial or for your branding work as well?
I think it's impacted everyone hugely. I think it's really a really positive thing. I also did just watch the Netflix documentary A Social Dilemma. So
I watched it too. It freaked me out.
I mean, I can't leave though. I mean, who can leave? Yeah, I think, you know, in terms of news, and particularly celebrity news, things change because they are the content producers now. You know, we would do the interviews with them. They produce their own content. They break their own stories. They break their own news. You know, historically, they'd go to a brand and say they were pregnant, or, you know, do the breaking interview. Well, now they're announcing it on their Instagram. Or, you know, releasing a new album, you know, that would be perhaps a magazine interview. Now it's, you know, a whole kind of Instagram countdown, or they might delete their Instagram account as a big PR stunt. You know, it has massively changed. I think it's put control. I think the control has changed. But, you know, for brands, it's hugely powerful. It's a brilliant tool for connecting you directly to the customer. Really understanding your audience, what they like and what they don't like, and that kind of real up to the minute, you know, up to the second data as well. Whereas, you know, historically, if you're producing a monthly magazine, you know, your data is different. You can't tell how many people, you know, you can't tell where they bought that magazine from and why they chose to go and buy it. Whereas you can look at your website and see, okay, they all came from Instagram today. What was it we did that was really great there?
And equally, like you can't tell, like when somebody's reading a magazine, you don't know how long they're spending on a particular page, like what,
yeah,
like
or how many times they've read it, may have come back to that page, or you know, they might have looked at that page or flicked past it, or they might have spent an hour reading it, or they may have cut it out and stuck it on their wall. Like, you don't know. And I think there's so much information you can get from digital, not in a negative way, but that can shape what you do and what you deliver to your customer and to your reader.
And even things like affiliates now, you know, I like work at the Mail Online, and all of our content, when you feature a top from Topshop, you know, it's all done on an affiliate scheme, so you can track your readers going through. But you can't on a magazine, you can't tell if you feature a top from Topshop in a magazine, you can't tell that if they've gone and bought it, whereas now we know who they are. Like, we can literally track them going from our website to theirs. We know how much they're spending, what time they're spending it, what time of the month they're spending it,
like country they're logging on from. Like, and you know, I love print, and I always will, and I do think there'll always be a place for print, long form features, but you know, our world is changing, and it is a digital world, and we have to move with that.
And when you are looking for ideas for digital, and when you have done for print as well, how do you go about kind of packaging up or like spinning those content ideas like into kind of interesting things to read for that particular platform and that publication?
Yeah, so I think you know what works for your audience wherever you're working, whether that's, you know, whether that's a reader or that's a customer. You know what works, you know who your customer is or your reader is, you know, whether it's, you know, you normally have a kind of idea of like your typical reader, but you should know what they consume, when they consume it, again, like all this data we've kind of talked about, and what makes them tick, what makes them click. And I think once you kind of understand that and you're kind of following the trends, that makes it quite easy to kind of build out a strategy. But also just, you know, you look to other publications for inspiration, you know what people of that age would enjoy, you know what's done well historically. Is it that, you know, you did a piece before and you can follow up from that? I think that's really important as well. What did well, and how can you follow on from that? How can you continue that journey and you know, just keep that story going. I think that's really important. But yeah, it just comes from like real creativity as well, thinking outside the box, you know, like just what do people enjoy, what makes people engaged, and yeah, I think it's and you know, two heads are always better than one. I always think a brainstorm really works as well, just bringing in different people from different departments, or you know, just getting different ideas together as well.
And obviously we read a lot about clickbait stories now. Me working from Mail Online, I know all about that. But not that I write them like that personally, but how do you go about creating angles for stories?
That's better, I'm a bit brighter. Angles for stories, in what respect?
So say for instance you were to interview a celebrity, and you came away with all of your quotes, how would you decide what angle you're going to take for that particular feature, like the key bit to like pick up on?
Yeah, so interviewing, I love interviewing. I think it's such a skill.
I love doing this.
Yeah, I did some training with a team I was working with a while ago, and it's I think it's just a real skill once you kind of understand how to kind of shape a conversation and lead that. And I think you have to be a really good listener. You have to understand, you have to go in there knowing what you want to get. So there was a time, I think I told the students that I came to talk to about this with when I interviewed Rita Ora, because that was a really good example of, you know, I knew that there were rumours of her launching a Topshop range, and I knew that she was best friends with Cara Delevingne, and I knew that, you know, she'd obviously got her record contract through Jay-Z. So I tried to drop all these things into conversation. And she was one of the most open people anyway. but I also understood the kind of direction that her PR was taking her in. Like I knew she wouldn't want to talk about relationships, and I was working for Marie Claire at the time, so that wouldn't be something we'd cover anyway. But you almost have like two people to please. You kind of got to please like your own publication and your reader, but you also need to please the PR as well. So it's kind of ticking both boxes. But I would always ensure myself and my team would come away with a number of stories. You wouldn't just do an interview and publish that. You'd always go in and try and get 6 to 8 stories, and that would be pulled from just one great quote. So it might be that, I think she said something like, she went to Beyonce and Jay-Z's house and ate chicken wings, and Blue Ivy's wardrobe was incredible. Well, then I did like a fashion story on how, her talking about Blue Ivy's wardrobe. That was one story. And then, asked her about the Topshop range, and she started talking about high street fashion and why she loved it. That was another story. And then asked her about Cara, and then she was like, oh, I'd love to actually do a collection with Cara. Well, that was another story. And you only need a couple of good quotes to make a story. You don't need one quote to make a good story. And that's kind of how things tend to work now as well. I mean, yeah, you'll get publications that'll make a story out of nothing. Literally, they'll be going to the petrol station. That's the story. But yeah, it's kind of looking at what would work well, how you could orchestrate that headline. What do you think would perform well in terms of traffic? Would that do well, particularly from Facebook or Instagram, and then drive people to site? So it's quite it's more than just kind of going in and having a chat. It's very well kind of planned beforehand.
So you would write all of your questions out before. Would you have like a team meeting before you go into an interview to discuss?
Yeah, you tend to have a bit of brainstorm. Yeah, bit of brainstorm. It might be the whole team. Sometimes it's just with one person. You might even just do it by yourself. The best interviews are ones where you don't have to kind of have the questions approved. I did a phoner with Kristen Stewart, and the whole list of questions had to be approved, and she clearly had scripted answers, and her agent was on the phone. It was literally like we were both reading a script. It was fun. Like,
it's
she
not like a natural interview, is it?
No, she called me dude, and she was really like warm, and she was great at playing the game, but I was sitting there just reading it on the phone. Like, there was no it wasn't a proper interview, and I didn't feel like a journalist at that point. Yeah.
Are there any things that or techniques that you utilize to get those scoops? Because there's a lot of, if a celebrity is working with a brand, for instance, and they have got those like scripted kind of questions, they will obviously be interviewed by other publications. So how do you make sure that your story is, you've got a scoop that's going to be different to a different publication?
I mean, definitely don't piss them off. I was never one of those really pushy journalists, and maybe that, some people would say that's not a good journalist, but it worked for me. I was always kind of very warm and down to earth, and really put them at ease and just treated them like a normal person, and that actually really worked. Just having a normal conversation. It almost shouldn't feel like an interview. It should feel just like a really comfortable chat, and that's when they'll open up. And that was, in my experience, the best thing to do. And when I got the best quotes, or even spoke to them at a party, it was just kind of making chit chat and talking about something relatable, or small talk, and also being remembered. There were few of like Made in Chelsea and Towie cast at the time who would remember me and come up to me at parties and stuff, or be willing to talk to me because I guess I hadn't pissed them off the last time I spoke to them. And I also wasn't one of those journalists that wrote pieces that would upset them. That wasn't the kind of place I wanted to be. So it was always kind of positive stuff. I mean, I have written negative stuff, but it's not something I wanted to do.
The publications that you did work for, what was generally their treatment of the notion of celebrity?
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because you know, I did a couple of little tabloid things and I didn't like it. Like my quote was twisted. And it was actually like I interviewed Professor Green at the NME Awards, just in the bar, and was chatting to him about tattoos. And he said something like, I mean, I did get the quote like correct, but I just can't remember what it was. How he would never get a tattoo like on his face or like past his neck. And I think someone like a famous rapper had one that week, and we just got talking about his tattoos and stuff. So he was like, jawline is the limit. And when I supplied the quotes to the Daily Star, they twisted them and they called him the tattoo police and said like he thinks that, I mean, I supplied a story as well, and they just rewrote, they used my quotes into a different story. Thank God they didn't put my name to it. But he then had a rant on Twitter and he said something like, never let a girl from a red top interview you in a noisy bar. And I just died. But yeah, it wasn't my fault. And it was harmless, like it was harmless.
Yeah, of course.
He just didn't like they'd call him the tattoo police, but obviously what I supplied probably wasn't as divulging for them, or you know, as engaging. But yeah, that was a funny one. But yeah, and then you get, you know, I remember being in the queue for the Rita Ora interview, and I was interviewing for Marie Claire, and two of my old Look colleagues were behind me and said, oh, we didn't get an interview with her, can you ask some questions for us? Well, that put me in a really awkward position because they were my former bosses, and they said, oh, can you ask her about her relationship with Calvin Harris? Well, that's something that Marie Claire would never cover, so it wasn't even on my list. If I asked that, I could potentially have pissed her off. I didn't ask it, and I got about 8 stories. I got, you know, some brilliant content from her. You know, there was a reason that Look didn't get interview access, because it's actually like quite amazing how they've changed her image from being like the real kind of R&B girl, like quite, you know her like hoop earrings and big hair and stuff, to being like the really glossy, polished cover girl. Like you never thought how she started out that she'd end up being, you know, cover on the fashion monthlies. And you know how they've kind of positioned her and, you know, played her career has been really good. But you know, again, they carefully picked the publications they wanted her to appear in. So yeah, that's a really good example of how the treatment is different, because sometimes they'll go quite trashy. Sometimes, you know, if you looked at interviewing her for like, you know, Q magazine, it might be about, you know, something really powerful in the music industry, and or like, you know, just being a powerful woman, or you know, she might do something for the Evening Standard magazine that's a bit more about, you know, I don't know, her, I now can't think of anything, her career or what she's up to, or travel, or anything. And then you might get something like one of the celebrity weeklies that just does something quite trashy about her weight, or you know, her relationships. So it's different for every publication, as any brand is. You know, you've got different tones of voice, different audiences, different customers.
And when it comes to those kind of tabloids who kind of sensationalize news and sensationalize celebrity stories, what kind of effect do you think that has on your relationships with these people, but also like the whole concept of mental health as well?
That's a really good question. I think it's a big question as well. I think looking back, you know, it's not an industry I work in anymore, but I definitely see, I don't think it's just the kind of celebrity or influencer that's being written about. I think it has an impact on the reader, and I think it has an impact on the writer that's written it. Like I definitely, you know, writing about body image for a long time and how skinny celebrities are, or how much weight they put on, or I didn't like being in that world. I didn't like writing about people's appearances. I think writing about fashion is one thing, but even when you're writing about beauty a lot, I think you have to almost like sense check yourself and be like, this is just, you know, it's also fine not to wear makeup. I think, you know, I think we have to think about, you know, the next generation of kids that are coming into this, and a world where, you know, 2-year-olds know how to work an iPhone, and them then digesting, how they digest their news is different. You know, they're never going to pick up a newspaper. They're never going to read, I don't think, you know, a really great column. I think they're going to get all their news from social media. And, you know, that could potentially be quite dangerous. And yeah, I think there's probably a reason why, you know, a lot of stars break the news themselves now, because they want ownership and control of that story, particularly when it's something personal. And, you know, they'd rather kind of say it themselves than have that quote spun. So yeah, I think there's a lot of work to do in the industry, but I do think it's changing quite organically because of the way we read news, the way news is delivered, the way, you know, brands deliver content now. I think our reading habits are changing, and where we go to for our content. But yeah, in terms of mental health, I think there's a long way to go in terms of body image and, you know, relationships, like how we speak to each other. I think there's a lot of work to do. I don't know what the solution is to that yet, but I think we just need to be mindful of it, I guess.
How do you feed that into your work for brands now? Because so Bex now is a you know, you're a copywriter, and you do consulting and branding work as well. Obviously you take charge of, for a lot of brands, of kind of their tone of voice. So how do you feed that, you know, that whole concept of making people feel good, and you know, positive body image and beauty ideals? How do you feed that into what you do now?
Yeah, it's hard. It depends, you know, it depends what brand you work for. And I think brands are getting really good at having more responsibility when it comes to things like this. So I think they're a lot further ahead than press and media. I'm working for a big fashion brand at the moment as head of copy, and that involves kind of sense checking and proofing every single word in the business, from catalogue to website to social to email, everything. And yes, there is a set tone of voice, but you know, we've had to look at things quite hard this year. You know, we've had Black Lives Matter. We've had to kind of take a real hard look at how we talk about people, how we, you know, deliver our content, how we deliver our photography, how diverse that is. I think COVID has been a real wake-up call. I said to my team the other day, you'll always remember where you were a copywriter during COVID. And it's been, I hate saying this because I think, like, obviously the NHS have had it much harder, but it has been really, really tough to be a copywriter during this climate, because you're trying to sell products when there's a global pandemic. And I think they've done a brilliant job. We've had a lot of praise for the approach we've taken, but you're trying to be sensitive to people's feelings and to their anxieties, and, you know, sell holiday clothes when no one is going on holiday. You know, at the moment, sell party wear. And for another client, I'm working on party hair piece. Well, no one's, who's, you know, like, it's so hard. Like, are we going to be doing our party hair? Like, I hope so, but we might not be going to parties. But yeah, you have a responsibility to, I guess, how do I put this? To support and to be seen to care. I think that's the most important thing. Like, you know, the best brands these days, there's whole tons of research how people buy into brands that stand for something. There's a lot of research with particularly Gen Z, so that's, you know, you guys that are at uni at the moment, that buy into and support brands that stand for something, whether that's a sustainability angle or a diversity angle, or, you know, have a brilliant, like, social responsibility program, or, you know, that's what makes brands now, and that's what makes them successful. And I think customers can see straight through it when it's not sincere, so I think you have to be very careful. But yeah, it's been a huge learning curve even for me this year to navigate around not even saying the right thing, because I think that's wrong to say. It's like what can we do?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what can we do to make change? Like, we're the ones writing the copy. What should we be doing to make things better? And it's not just about selling a product. It's who's looking at this, and how is that going to make them feel?
Mm-hmm.
Is it going to inspire them? Is it going to engage them? It's not just about getting a click. Like, are they going to support the brand long term? Are they going to read our content, engage with it? Is it going to be thought provoking? Like, there's so much to think about.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, yeah, it's about having substance.
Definitely. And showing, like you say, to those readers that that you've got values, and their values that
Yeah.
that they share with you, because ultimately that's how they connect. Like, they don't just go to a brand now just to buy clothes. They go there for so many more reasons, that for inspiration, to connect, to like see like people, like it's
and also the thing is now, like, they will call you out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's can be hugely damaging for brands, but I think that's great. Like, everyone should, they should be responsible. And so I think media has got to catch up a little bit, but I know there's lots of magazines, publications that are doing great campaigns, but it's more than a campaign.
Mm-hmm.
It's every day.
And getting to know your audience is pivotal to connect with them. How do you go, because you write for lots of different brands, and you have written for lots of different magazines. How do you get to know your reader or your customer, to know how they want to be spoken to? But also, how do you tailor your writing?
It's a really good question. I mean, you'll always have a tone of voice. So every brand would have a tone of voice on how they talk to the customer. This is who they are, this is what they believe in, this is what they feel strongly about, this is where they shop, this is how often they eat out. Like, they'll paint a picture of who their customer is. So a lot of that will come from the data. So, like, again, we know their shopping habits, we know what they're reading, we know what they read the most, how long they stayed on that page, we know what their habits are, and that's really key. A lot of companies also will do focus groups, and
Mm-hmm.
that's really important. So they might have a group of people that they call on to ask how they're feeling, what's going on this week. A lot of big brands are doing that at the moment on a weekly basis. I've seen even like videos that have been sent in by customers, and they'll talk about how they're feeling, what their mindset is at the moment. That's been something that's shaped a lot of what we're doing at the moment, where I'm working. So it's been a case of calling out, if we're going to approach an email or catalogue or look at something in particular, it's a case of, well, what's the customer saying, how is she feeling at the moment? There's an insight manager who I've been speaking to at the company, and trying to get out of her, like, what what's fine at the moment, how is she feeling? As being able to kind of tailor what you're writing with that in mind, you're going to tick the right boxes for her. So you're lucky if you've got someone like that at the company, and most do. Big companies, they'll have an insight manager, or someone that runs those focus groups or collects that information or collects that data. But in smaller businesses, it will be taking the sentiment from social, how have they reacted to things, what are they commenting, or if you're even smaller, it'll be just talking to the customer.
Mm-hmm.
Asking them. It might be even put a post out and ask how they're feeling. I think there's had to be a lot of kind of trial and error with something like COVID, because no one's been through this before, and it's like, what do you want to hear from us? What do you want to see?
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to offend, but that people want a distraction, and that finding that balance is hard, but you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's just getting, hearing from them directly, understanding the data, seeing what they're buying, seeing what they're saying about it. If you're a brand that has reviews, you can read the reviews. So there's lots of tactics.
And you freelanced and consulted for some really big name brands like M&S and Percy and Reed. Like, I've got an endless list of places that you freelance for. How do you help brands speak to their audience and connect with them?
So it comes down to just trying to write really good copy. You know, when I speak to brands, it might be like, we want to do this, we want to launch this product, we want to launch this campaign, this is how we want to do it, and this is kind of what we want to say. And then it'll be for me to kind of pull that together and come up with the words. So it might be they need like a really strong headline or a really strong campaign line, and you know, how do we use the SEO keywords we need and put that into this copy and make it sound great. Or you know, it might be a brand that's working on a brand new website, and you know, we need to look at that landing page. What does it need to have on it? How can we bring this to life? It might be that they're just launching their Christmas hub. How are we going to talk about Christmas? How do we bring the essence of the brand and what it stands for, but sell the products and also still maintain our tone of voice and what we're about, and talk to the customer as we normally would.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you'll always have a list of like phrases and words that you do or don't say. And you know, particularly if you're working for a brand and you're a new freelancer, you might be pulled up on things like, oh, that's not something we'd say. We'd say it like this. So there's always kind of a set kind of way you talk to the customer and the kind of language you use. But it's kind of bringing their ideas to life with words. Mm-hmm. I'm quite lucky, like the last few years I've kind of expanded outside of that. So, you know, when I say it like a brand consultant, it might not just be the words. It'll be like, you know, do you know a photographer and a designer and a web developer, and how do we pull this all together? So particularly for smaller brands, I've, you know, been able to kind of build teams together and help them bring that to life. Mm-hmm. Bigger brands, I'll go in kind of a consultant, more at copy level. But you still work very closely with the art directors and creative directors and bring mm-hmm. it all together. And I love that. That's really fun, particularly working with, you know, a team of experts. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's essentially bringing it to life on the page.
And you mentioned there that you've worked with different photographers and stylists and lots of different people to bring something to life. What would you say are the key ways to kind of build up those contacts? Because those people would have been people that you've worked with before or you've met along the way. Are there any?
Yeah, I think, do you know what? I think it was you who said this, and obviously we've worked together before, and also very wise. And I'm sure it was you that said, like, the secret to being a successful freelancer, you don't even have to be like amazing at your job. Like, you have to be nice.
You just have to be nice. It's so true.
You have to be like, and not even just not. You have to be like, you know, show your initiative, be brilliant to work with. And you know, I definitely am that freelancer that gets in way too deep when I work for a company. Like, I pretty much am part of the furniture. So I probably go because I just like, I love to do a good job and hate letting people down. But yeah, you just have to, you know, be nice, you know, connect with people. Like I think, you know, I'm someone I think that does connect quite easily with people, and I love meeting new people and making new friends. And I think it's a case of, yeah, just building a rapport with people. You know, be honest, be real. You know, don't give any bullshit. Just be yourself. And you know, I think one of the most important things as well, if you don't know something, be upfront about it. Mm-hmm. I don't know everything. I get things wrong. I got a grammar thing wrong this week with my team, and I was like, I don't confess to know everything. You know, and I think that kind of raw and, you know, realness and honesty, I think, is really important. If I don't know the answer to something, I say I will find out.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know it. I'd rather do that than attempt it and do a bad job.
Yeah.
So I would train myself or find someone that can do it or get the information. But yeah, and I think, you know, meeting deadlines and being really efficient, being really shit hot organised. Mm-hmm. I mean, I have an insane colour coded calendar. I'm very proud of it. Some would call it that is, yeah. But yeah, being organised and knowing your stuff, like people know, I guess they can come to me and I'll get it done, and I'll get it done in a way that you know, they're happy with. And also, you know, be willing to take feedback. You know, that takes years of experience. Like, you know, I've gone from probably in my 20s bawling my eyes out if I got, you know, red lines through something to actually like, no, you're right, like how can I make this better, and actually, yeah, tell me how I can make it better for you. You know, or coming back with amends, and okay, well, maybe the brief wasn't entirely clear, can we go over it again and just make sure I fully understand it? Or, you know, like working with someone, I think that's been invaluable, particularly for me the past few years, is understanding that feedback isn't always negative. It's not always a negative thing. And but I do think, like, and not to sound patronizing, but I do think it comes with age and experience as well. That kind of confidence. It's taken me a long time to not cry when I give them, you know, feedback, and see it as really constructive and helping me to improve.
And you know, that's something that we teach our students. We are constantly giving our students feedback all the time, and I think it's so true that when you first start out, it's really hard to take on the chin, isn't it? Especially because, like, when you go to uni, it's so different to studying at A level or college. Like, you're given a brief, and then you know, and then you roll with it and you kind of do what you want within that brief, and then you're given feedback on it, and then it's like, but it can be confusing, I suppose. But learning how to kind of step out of yourself a little bit and like look at your work like pragmatically and think, okay, let's not be so personal about it. And
it never is personal. But also, I think, you know, also in the same respect, don't be afraid to challenge feedback at times.
Especially if you don't understand it, you know, like, always ask.
I think I understand it, or, you know, like I had someone that was wrong. I was working for a beauty brand, and I had to write all the product descriptions for their website, and I was working with the head of education for the brand, and he went through every single product description and said, and there were 300, and said, I don't understand why on earth you've repeated the product name in the product description. Well, that is basic SEO, like the most basic SEO, that you need the product name in the body copy as well as in the header. And he literally said, you've written it right under the heading, like, why would you do that? And I had to call him out on it and say, like, I'm really sorry, but unless you know some, I said it in a really polite way, but I just said, unless there's a very different strategy you're taking with this that isn't SEO based, that is what needs to be in the copy. And he came back and apologized and said, leave it as it is. So that was a real learning experience for me, because I even texted a couple of friends and said, I don't know how to approach this, I don't want to embarrass him. But I even went and looked on his LinkedIn, and I was like, he doesn't seem to have any digital experience, so I feel like maybe he was kind of more like store based. So I was kind of trying to understand where he was coming from and identify like where that feedback had come from. I mean, that was probably like taking it a step too far. But yeah, I think that definitely taught me to don't be afraid to call it out, you know, in the right way. Or, you know, say, if you don't agree with something, you know, can we talk about this? Like, what, you know, do you feel strongly about this? Can we talk about it? Or did you absolutely want it changed? So I think that's a real learning experience as well. Like, sometimes there's some movement, or, you know, they might not have, you know, they might not be right.
And and when you're working for a brand, you mentioned that you've done like copywriting, and you've also looked at like their homepages and things like that. How can our opinions of brands can change like very rapidly, but then they can also change like totally over time? Like, you look at that story of Rita Ora, for example, and our opinion, like the public's perception of her changed over time. How can like content strategy be used to shape opinion of a brand?
Wow, I mean, it certainly can. I think a lot of brands obviously going down the editorial route now, and have been for a few years. There are a number of reasons of that, partly to do with SEO, so using the right search terms. It might be in kind of blog content, but it's also giving a better user experience. So, you know, it might be that you need to make just the site engaging. It needs video content. You know, don't just sell the product, talk about how to use the product and offer a tutorial instead. And I think things like that bring the customer back. but also keep them on the site longer. It's kind of showing them different ways to wear it or use that product, or, you know, tutorials and that kind of thing. I've totally forgotten your question.
So why? How do you shape how do you shape people's opinion of a brand through content strategy?
Of a brand. So I think the other stuff is through the substance. So, you know, the sustainability stuff, the kind of charity angles. I think it's being very open about, you know, for instance, like there are fashion brands now that publish their factory lists. You know, you have to be very open about, you know, stuff is made in the Philippines, or, you know, it's made in China. So I think there's a real honesty piece there. I think there's an editorial piece in terms of the storytelling, you know, being able to see what the brand stands for, being able to show the products in a different way. It might be they never considered using that product until they saw video content showing you, or, you know, they might not have bought into a brand before because they didn't think they stood for anything, and then they read that they're doing this big charity partnership. Or, you know, it might just be the way they talk to the customer. Maybe it's in a really powerful way, you know, the tone of voice is really strong, or I think there's a lot of factors that come into it. And, you know, it could be any opinion. In the same way, it can be, you know, have a negative effect. You know, you can say something wrong or take the wrong approach to something, and, you know, it can completely turn a customer off and they wouldn't want to purchase from you ever again. That might be that you delivered a product that they don't like the way you've messaged it. They don't like that you've not used diverse models, like you ways to kind of to put off people now. And, you know, quite rightly, I wouldn't buy from a brand that I didn't think had handled things correctly, or, you know, in the right way. So I think, yeah, you have to be very careful and really mindful of the customer, and also just doing the right thing.
Always strategy for life.
Yeah,
basically. So you obviously started out writing editorial, and you've gradually transitioned to doing more branding and commercial work.
Yeah.
How have you found that transition, and how do you think the work differs from editorial to commercial?
I mean, there's sometimes I miss writing like long features, and I have done some of that for web, but yeah, I guess I think there's a lot more moving parts in the brand and commercial side. You have to learn very quickly, really kind of listen to other teams. I learn new things every day. I didn't feel like I got that when I worked in editorial. I think you're not moving as quickly with the times as such. Your strategy is totally different. And you might be working like a month by month basis rather than, you know, I don't know, thinking further ahead. So yeah, I guess that sometimes the pace is different. But yeah, I would say there's a lot more moving parts to what I do now in terms of the commercial stuff, the looking at user journeys, even when you're writing copy, how everything in a campaign ties together, how, you know, how it's going to be delivered on social, you know, what is that strategy across delivering that piece of content? How are you going to do it across social? How are you going to do it across email? How are you going to do it in print? Whereas I feel like editorial is a bit more kind of, this is the story or this is the content, and it will be delivered here. Or, you know, like across these channels. Whereas I think there's a lot more strategy to the digital stuff and to the brand stuff as well. And I think it's a lot more data driven as well, which is brilliant. I think, like we said before about, you know, you never know how long someone has stayed on a magazine page, but you'll know, you know, a hell of a lot of things about a page on a website. Yeah.
And you have been freelancing now, and you've been running your own business for the last few years now. You mentioned earlier about, in terms of on a personal level, being a nice person and, you know, working hard and, you know, all of that sort of stuff. But in terms of the service you offer and the business side of things, how do you make what you do stand out from the crowd, from what other brand strategists and copywriters offer? Sorry.
That's a really good question. Also, I'm just claiming to be a nice person. People must
You are. I can vouch for it.
Like, this sounds terrible.
I'll write you a reference.
I mean, I've now just forgotten the question again. How
do you make yourself stand out?
How do you make myself stand out? I think it's that not pigeonholing yourself. So, I mean, I had a meeting today just before this with a property company about launching their websites and social channels, like property development. It's so far away from like some of the stuff I normally do, but they want, they have a brand, they have no digital space, no digital presence at all. And they want it to sound great. They're like, we don't know how to talk about our company, and the company's doing great, but we just need to be online. Like, how do we do that? And they've asked me to kind of bring that story to life. And so I think I've always been willing to try anything and work with any kind of brand. And I moved out of London. I'm now based in Whitstable, and I love working with the smaller businesses and startups. And I work with a life coach. I've worked with a little bridal store the other day. I did some SEO training for them. I love that. I love working with people and learning from people. And I also really love educating and teaching people new things. So I think, I haven't just said like, I'll only work with London businesses, or I'll only work with big fashion brands. I would do anything. If I can help someone, I spoke to a mortgage company the other day that said like, we're not a traditional mortgage company. We wear Converse. We don't wear suits. Like, we're really cool. We want the younger generation to understand that you can buy a house. And they're like, how do we get that across on Instagram? Well, that sounded really exciting to me.
Yes, it sounds really different.
Yeah, and so different. And this is the thing. It's like giving brands a voice. So I think I've always been keen to kind of just offer my skills lots of places. There are brands that I wouldn't work with, but so I think that's probably set me apart. And also I started doing training. So I've done a couple of workshops that people attended on how to build a content strategy. I've done some SEO training. So I've kind of tried to kind of offer my skills as also a service,
right,
as well as going into companies. So where I'm working kind of full time for this, for a fashion brand at the moment, managing a department, that is quite unusual for me, because I would normally kind of not stay that long. And I'd do my consulting and I'd move around a lot. And that's what I love about my job now, is that I work with so many different types of people and can, help them tell their story. And that's when I also still feel like, I've used those journalism skills and that journalism degree, because at the end of the day, I still don't think I've nailed how to describe what I do. I still kind of stutter, and I'm like, I kind of do this, and I kind of do this, and I still go to say I'm a journalist, but I'm not really anymore. But I think the heart of what I do always will be, because I'll always be a storyteller.
But it's probably that your job's always going to be evolving anyway. So it's like you said, like, it's so you never want to pigeonhole yourself. Well, like exactly what you said earlier was, actually you don't want to give yourself a job title, and you want it to be like more the skills and things like that. So
maybe I should just put TBC as my job. But no, it is. It's changing.
I'll get back to you.
Rapidly, and how SEO even worked and keywords worked has changed so much over the last few years. And that's another thing. Like, I have to keep training and learning, and sometimes it's great to go into bigger businesses because I learn a lot, because they're constantly evolving, and also even just working with the smaller businesses, I learn a lot about your everyday customer that's on the high street. That's invaluable as well. So yeah, and I love learning. I'm a bit of a geek, so anything I can do to kind of build on my skills. So yeah, I guess that I haven't pigeonholed myself, and that's what set me apart, probably.
It must be such a nice time to be working with those smaller brands, because we're all being encouraged to like shop small and support like independent stores and traders. So it must be lovely to work with those
really
brands.
is. And when I spoke to this bridal store the other day, they'd actually been recommended me, and I had a chat with them, and the owner, you know, they'd had this website, and she said, like, we're not ranking anywhere on Google, like, I don't know what to do. And now they're ranking, like, within 2 weeks.
That's amazing.
From like helped them with their landing page, and you know, they had to set up their Google My Business, and just, you know, get the right words on there, and it was just kind of helping them shape that. But you know, bridal stores have had a hell of a tough time this year as well. You know, all the weddings have been cancelled, and I think this is the thing, like, a lot of companies are kind of taking the time to focus on their digital experience. You know, I built a takeaway service for a restaurant in their back end, so they could do online orders. So, you know, a lot of people have also had the time to kind of focus on those things, focus on their marketing, have a look. You know, I mean, if they've been lucky enough, obviously, to kind of stay afloat and get kind of government support. I know there's a lot of businesses that have, you know, really struggled or haven't survived, but yeah, it's a really, I just want to help. Yeah, it is nice, and they're so grateful as well. Like, I had one company like buy me a bunch of flowers as a thank you.
Oh, that's so cute.
I had another one who actually added £20 onto my invoice and said, please buy yourself a bottle of wine or something nice as a thank you. I mean, who adds 20 quid onto your invoice? Like, it was so,
that's just really thoughtful. Like, it's not even a lot, but you just think
it was just a gesture. Like, they're so grateful. Yeah, so grateful for your help. I love that. I really do.
And you mentioned there that you were recommended to the bridal store, but are there any other ways that you go about securing work? Do you approach clients, and if so, how do you do that?
I've been incredibly lucky. I haven't really approached clients that much. I did when I first left like the celebrity world, because I wanted to kind of position myself as more of a copywriter, and I was really craving doing something like really meaningful. I was felt just really disillusioned and really kind of disheartened with the whole industry. So I was kind of just literally searching online for freelance copywriter wanted, you know, and I actually started working with a charity that needed a part-time copywriter, and that got me a lot of connections. So that is one way. There are places advertising, but there's some brilliant Facebook groups and networking groups for small businesses that are always looking for writers or designers, or can someone write a press release, or can someone help me with this PR, or it could be anything. I've been to quite a few local networking groups as well. There are some national ones that are brilliant. Most of them are over Zoom at the moment, obviously, but you have to, someone once told me that as a freelancer, you always have to make sure you make the time for admin. I don't do that, but I think you have to make the time for like admin, training and networking, and I think make sure you've got that into your, you know, worked into your week. I think I've found the last few months quite challenging, because I've had a 4-day-a-week role managing a department, which is essentially a full-time job, but I've also kept my other clients because I still want to remain freelance and self-employed, and taking inquiries and doing training, and I've had no time for anything, you know, and I've even taken on stuff in the evenings and at weekends because I want to stay out in that space. Sorry, I'm so dark, but I don't want to like leave.
Right, don't worry.
So I might just put a torch on my phone. So what was I saying? Yeah, so putting yourself out, you really have to put yourself out there and do self-promotion. I think also really make your presence known on LinkedIn. You do get work from there. I get work from there. Try and go on it as often as you can, just to do something, if it's even liking a picture or commenting on something, because the algorithms love that. So try and stay active on it and just have some kind of activity. And, you know, promote yourself on social as well. It's something I've dropped the ball with, but just put yourself out there, and what you do as well. Like, you know, talk about all those transferable skills, talk about the things you've done, things you can offer. That's really helped me. I've had people contact me. Some of it's been from word of mouth. Some of it's that, you know, I've done something and for someone and they've said, oh, so and so wants it as well, or yeah, I think it's being able to offer as many things as you can. And still in kind of quite a concise way. I think even on my website there are a couple of things maybe I should take off because perhaps it's confusing, they don't quite fit into my portfolio, but a majority of it is also kind of storytelling, digital and content. But yeah, kind of just making people want to work with you as well. Be nice.
You said to me, and this is something that you said to me when the day that I left Look, you said to me, always have an online presence.
Did I say that?
You said that to me, and I've never forgotten it.
Yeah,
because from then on I was like, oh right, yeah, I do need to do that, because and it's always made so much sense. And I've always, like, even if you're not, like, I always try and put out there of like the work that I'm doing, not in a braggy way, but it's just being like, hey,
you do it really well. You do it really well, and it could be something really small, or just like, you know, here's this thing I worked on, or, you know, here's a lovely review, or this brand said this, or I worked on this, or and also, like, I think part of it is I never want to forget, you know, CVs, it's not really a thing anymore, having a CV. It isn't. It's, you know, yes, you can have like, this is where I've worked, but it is more, I think, in this kind of field, it is about, you know, who you are online, and, you know, and how you kind of, what your portfolio looks like. You know, it's not just a sheet of paper with the dates of where you worked somewhere, it's what you produced during that time. I'm still asked, even at, you know, like my level, for an example of writing I've done, or, you know, an example of something I've produced. So I have to kind of keep everything. But also I, you know, I never want to lose that feeling when I, like, you even see me right now.
yeah.
The, you know, that feeling when I first got my first newspaper byline. It said,
I still remember it, like,
yeah,
it's the kick that I got when I first got it.
Yeah, like, I think, like, I remember one of them, there was like, I think it was like a fire at the army barracks in Canterbury, and went and interviewed like the superintendent policeman, and like, I remember it so clearly. I remember like my bio, and it's saying by Rebecca Martin, I cut it out of the paper, and, you know, and, you know, the fashion brand I'm working for, and the catalogue comes in. I'm like, I never want to lose that feeling of like, that's my work, I did that. And yeah, I mean, I've worked places where, if you look at the Look website, is no longer present online. Sky Living, that I worked for, is no longer present. Like, I've lost all of that. I never kept it. I never kept my stories. I did video, like red carpet interviews, I don't have them. So save everything as well, and make sure you've got, you know, really build that portfolio. I make a conscious effort now. If I've done something I'm really proud of, even just screenshot it and save it.
That's what I do.
Yeah, so, and you really have to make that time for the admin, because it is important. And there'll come a time where someone says, oh, I want you to do this, have you done anything like that before? And then if you can put that in front of them, like, they've never asked to see your CV, that's what they want to see.
Well, a lot of the time they want to see that you can actually, you know, put the proof is in the pudding, isn't it?
Yeah,
if you know, they obviously, like, the education, your degree is like massive, but actually the experience is so pivotal.
But that's it, isn't it? You know, not that the degree doesn't mean anything, but it's what you learn on the degree. It's not,
and how you apply it as well, I think.
Exactly, totally. And it's not, you know, no one's ever asked me, you know, the grade I got. It wasn't too well, but no, I'm joking. It wasn't too wrong, but
yeah, that's what I got to.
Yeah, no one's ever asked me, but, you know, those skills I got were invaluable, and the experience and the connections as well, you know, at the time. So yeah, it was invaluable.
And I have to ask you about this podcast that you did recently. That was an amazing way to get your name out there, and
thank you.
it was really interesting. So,
funny enough, that was launched by 2 former journalists, and one of them was the former editor of the Look website. So I worked with her, and I've been friends with her for years. We've worked together several times at different companies, and yeah, it came up. She asked if I'd be a part of it. So I was actually their first guest. And yes, it's called All Change Please, and it's about making a massive change, obviously, moving somewhere. So is that you're moving to the countryside? Is it you're moving to the city? What was the reason behind that? You know, I left a very big job and I left London to move to the seaside in Whitstable. My family is from here originally and kind of still nearby. But I talked about the moves I made in my job and kind of quitting my job for this lifestyle and going freelance. And although that was a huge risk, I do really believe in taking risks and also not staying somewhere if you're unhappy. And you know, I was once signed off work with anxiety when I worked in magazines, and I didn't talk about it for a really long time. I was embarrassed. I thought it meant that I wasn't very good at the job. And I think now I'm older and wiser, I find it really important to actually be really open about the fact that it's okay to, you know, work is really hard. And you know, things at the time that I worked there, it was really busy. Our deadlines were every 30 minutes. One of my team asked me if she could go to the loo at one point. It was, you know, it was brutal and it wasn't a nice place to work, and that had an effect and a huge impact on all our mental health. And even today, you know, I speak to people that worked there at the time and it stayed with them, that feeling of disappointment and failure. So I think it's really important, and I have a responsibility to be really open about, you know, like, I hope I haven't made this kind of line of freelancing look easy. Like, it is really hard. I do get ill sometimes, and I have to take really good care of myself and, you know, make sure I have human interaction. I'm not kind of working at home too much on my own. And yeah, also just try not to take everything so seriously. You know, I work really bloody hard, but I also am only good at my job if I'm well and taking care of myself. And I think, you know, above all, that's so important. It is just a job.
It is just a job.
Yeah.
But I think that's so important, isn't it? Because, you know, you have to keep in check. And also there's this misconception that once you get, you know, further down your career, you know everything. And that's not the case at all. Like, everybody's always working really hard and learning all the time, and we don't always get it right, and that's totally okay.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, like I said before, like, you know, years ago, if someone had called me out on a grammar mistake, I've been thinking about it for days. I would have been upset, and I was just like, yeah, I don't know everything. Oh, sorry, I should have looked that up or double checked if I wasn't sure. You know, and it was a member of my team that called it out, and I was like, yeah, you're totally right, and I really respect you for challenging me on it. And, you know, you're right, I was wrong. And I think, again, that comes with the years of experience. And yeah, just, I think it's great that you're working with the students on how to accept feedback and how informative and useful it is. But yeah, it's a learning experience.
And my final question is, because I'm sad to come, I feel like I could talk to you all day.
I said I'd just keep talking.
I know. Well, I'm glad you have. I could keep on going all the time. We are, a lot of our, you know, the students are going into like different avenues, and there will be students who want to be writers and they want to become copywriters and basically do what you do. So what are the key skills you think that you utilize now that somebody who is wanting to do your job should learn?
I think just basic writing skills, understanding different methods of writing. So what does a long form feature look like? What, you know, an intro, a middle and an end? What does a web story look like, and how is that structured? How is a blog structured? So understanding the different forms of writing and a news story, and reading everything, you know, like reading all those different stories and how different companies structure it. That's something I have to really keep on top of, you know, understanding how different companies approach things and how they do it. So staying on top of that, different ways of writing. I think also it's imperative to understand the digital world at the moment. Understand how Instagram works, understand how Google works and Facebook. Like, there isn't a company in the world that isn't using them to their advantage right now and using them to sell you know, their products. So whether you go into, you know, a role as a merchandiser or a journalist, or, you know, whatever company you're working at and whatever role, like, you should understand how the digital experience of the customer or the reader works. That's so important. And also, like, staying on top of that, because it changes all the time. And I feel like I need to give 3. I don't know if you asked for 3.
No.
All
of them.
Methods of writing, digital, and probably just, staying connected with people that you meet, and trying to get that work experience, connecting with those people, understand, you know, whenever I work with people, I ask them lots of questions about themselves, and how did you get into it, and, you know, would you mind if I connected with you on LinkedIn, and, you know, just building those relationships. You want people to remember you. I remember I did work experience, I think it was a wedding actually, and the editor at the time was Deborah Joseph. She'd come from Glamour, and obviously she's back at Glamour, isn't she? And she said to someone that I was really on the ball. I never forgot it. I was like, oh my God, I'm on the ball. Like, that was huge. But I was, you know, I was efficient and I was on time, and, you know, I just tried to make sure I did a good job, and hearing her say that was brilliant. So yeah, be on the ball, and, you know, be nice to people and build those relationships.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
You can't even see me right now. It's like
I can see it. I can see it. You're glowing.
Yeah.
I really, really appreciate it. You're such an inspiration. Like, you know, having gone from Solent to where you are now, like, it's really, really inspiring. So thank you so much for joining us. Do you want to give a quick plug to your social channels or your website?
Sure. So I'm RLM_consulting on Instagram, Rebecca L. Martin on LinkedIn, and my website is RebeccaLMartin.com. Basically shoved the L in there because it's a very common name. It's all about my branding. It's all about my branding.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and please, if anyone has any questions, like always, my door is always open. So please.
That's so kind. You'll be flooded now. Well, thanks so much again. I really appreciate it, and hopefully I'll get to actually come down to Southampton at some point.
I would love to come back.
Yeah, I would love you to. Like, the students found you so engaging and inspiring before, so you're brilliant. So yeah, I'll be shoehorning you through the door as soon as this whole thing is
I'll be there.
Normal.
With my mask on.
Well, thank you so much, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you.